When we usually talk about evolution, we tend to picture it as this, like, branching tree.
Right, yeah, like a giant oak or something.
Exactly. A species starts at the trunk, and then it splits, and then it splits again, wandering off into these endless, wild, totally unique directions.
We basically expect diversity to just keep diverging
Eh.
because we think of nature as this, relentless inventor that never makes the exact same thing twice.
Right. But then, if you look at certain corners of the animal kingdom, suddenly that branching tree looks a lot more like, well, a funnel.
A funnel, yeah, I like that.
Nature doesn't wander off into a million directions. It just keeps enthusiastically churning out the exact same shape over and over again from completely different starting points. I mean, it's almost unsettling when you really think about it.
It is. It's the absolute definition of an evolutionary broken record, but, in the most biologically spectacular way possible.
For sure. So, welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are taking you on a journey to explore what might just be nature's ultimate evolutionary success story, which is the crab.
The humble crab.
The crab. We're going to uncover why nature just keeps inventing them, why scientists are currently struggling so mightily to figure out who is who, and what their present-day existential struggles can tell you about the immediate future of our oceans.
It's a huge topic.
It really is, and we've pulled together an incredible stack of sources for this. We're looking at deep-time evolutionary biology papers, taxonomic reviews from 2025, these grueling 200-day ocean acidification experiments, and recent ecological field reports straight out of the Chesapeake Bay.
Which is quite the reading list for you guys.
Oh, absolutely. And I have to say, looking at your backdrop today, you've really set the mood. I'm seeing these ancient stony fossil records on one side, glowing double helixes of DNA in the middle, and then this like slightly murky, beautiful tidal estuary fading into the background.
Yeah, I wanted to capture the whole timeline,
It works.
because to truly understand what is happening to crabs right now out in the water today, you really have to understand the deep-time genetic machinery that built them in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the research introduces a word that I am now mildly obsessed with, which is carcinization.
Yes, carcinization.
The idea that nature has independently evolved the crab-like shape multiple times across totally different, like, non-crab evolutionary lineages.
It's wild.
But before we get into the how, I have to stop and address the most shocking thing I read in these sources. Wait, back up. Are you actually telling me a king crab isn't a crab?
I am indeed.
Yeah.
Those massive, spiky, delicious king crabs you see on seafood buffets?
Yeah.
They are complete imposters.
That just blew my mind. I mean, they look like the ultimate crab.
Right.
But this evolutionary biology paper by Sternberg points out that king crabs actually evolved from hermit crab ancestors.
Yeah.
So they are essentially hermit crabs that just decided to ditch the shell, flatten out, and grow their own armor. How does that even work?
Well, what's fascinating here is that crab is almost less of a specific animal family and more of a biological verb.
A verb.
Yeah, carcinization is this rampant parallel evolution.
Mm-hmm.
You have these core traits, right? So a dorsoventrally compressed carapace.
Meaning they are flattened from top to bottom.
Exactly. And a broadened cephalothorax, which is that wide main body. And then this heavily reduced folded abdomen that's tucked securely underneath.
Right, the little flap underneath.
Yep. So king crabs separately arrived at this exact crab shape. And for a long time, evolutionary biologists looked at this as just, random convergence.
Like, oh, the crab shape is just so incredibly useful for hiding in rocks and walking on the seafloor that different species just happen to mutate their way into it.
Exactly.
Kind of like how sharks and dolphins both have dorsal fins because swimming fast just requires a certain shape.
Right. The physics of the ocean demand it.
Mm-hmm.
But Sternberg argues that carcinization is much deeper than random chance. It's an underlying synapomorphy.
Underlying synapomorphy, okay.
Which basically means they share a deep ancestral genetic toolkit. Specifically, we're talking about Hox genes and homeotic genes.
The master architects of the body plan.
Precisely. These are the master control genes that dictate the layout of an embryo, like where the head goes, where the legs sprout.
How the segments fuse together, all that.
Right. So Sternberg proposes that the genetic pathways required to build a crab aren't being randomly mutated from scratch every single time a species carcinizes.
Okay.
Those pathways are already sitting there, totally dormant, as a genetic potentiality across these vastly different crustacean lineages.
Okay, so instead of randomly rolling the evolutionary dice, is this like having the architectural blueprints for a sprawling armored mansion hidden inside the walls of a tiny wooden shack.
Oh, that's good.
And the instructions are already there, just waiting for the right environmental switch to be flipped to start building the mansion.
That is a brilliant way to look at it, honestly. The blueprint is there. The genetic circuitry to flatten the shell and fold the tail is already wired into the genome, but it's kept silent by epigenetic regulators.
So the epigenetics are like the switch.
Right, think of epigenetics as physical padlocks on the DNA. The code exists, but it's locked away. So through slight shifts in how those genes are repressed or expressed, what the paper calls differential de-repression.
Differential de-repression.
Yeah, basically the lock's open. The master architect reads the hidden blueprint, and boom, you get a crab.
But hold on. If the crab shape is such an optimal, inevitable evolutionary endpoint, and the blueprints are just sitting there locked in the DNA, why aren't all crustaceans turning into crabs?
That is the big question.
Right. Like, why do we still have shrimp? Why do lobsters still bother having those long, vulnerable tails if they could just be crabs?
That is the million-dollar evolutionary question. And it really comes down to the fact that while the blueprint exists, unlocking it requires both specific ecological pressures and a very specific genetic starting point.
Oh, so not everyone has the same locks.
Exactly. Not every lineage has the exact same padlocks on those genes. For a hermit crab ancestor, maybe it only took a few mutations in the regulatory regions of those hoxines to unleash the crab body plan.
The locks were flimsy.
Yeah, but for shrimp, that genetic leap might be locked behind far too many complex regulatory barriers to happen easily, even if the base genes are pretty similar.
Wow. It just radically changes how you view evolution.
It really does.
It's not just this blind, random walk through mutations where literally anything is possible. It's constrained, and in some ways it's guided by these deep, ancient genetic pathways.
Exactly. The pathways channel the evolution.
Which I imagine brings up a massive practical headache for the people actually out in the field.
Oh, you have no idea.
Because if nature just keeps putting different animals in the exact same crab costume using these hidden blueprints, how on earth do you and I, or even professional researchers, know what we are actually looking at on the beach?
It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And that leads us right into the absolute identification crisis that modern taxonomists are facing today, which we see really clearly outlined in the 2025 review by Ahmed and colleagues.
The scope of the confusion is just wild. We are talking about roughly 700 genera and 7,000 species of crabs globally.
Yeah, that's a lot of crabs.
And historically, the way scientists figured out what crab they were looking at was by staring very closely at its physical traits.
Right, it's morphology.
Measuring its shell shape, counting its